For 3 years, for the first time in 3 years, she asked how Dad's recovery was going. She sounded genuinely concerned rather than just pretending to care. The transfer had gone out the first of every month, quiet as a heartbeat, and no one had ever asked me to explain it. "I don't think we will fully recover." I stared at it, my cursor hovering over the cancel button, and Derek's words from 20 minutes ago at our dinner table echoed back to me. Not his problem. When I told him my father had surgery and that, "I don't think we will fully recover," he laughed. I never once made him carry a dollar he didn't know about. I pressed cancel. Then I sat in the dark, waiting for guilt to hit me. It never did. I have always been someone who notices discrepancies in numbers. That's what makes me proficient at what I do. I do the books for a manufacturing company in Asheville, and I can look at a spreadsheet of 400 rows and in a minute tell you which one is wrong. People assume skill is at the office. Doesn't. I see things at home, too. 3 years ago, I saw the exact moment my husband's pride broke into pieces in front of me. I saw exactly what I did about it after Derek, quote, "It's not a bad man." I just want to be clear about that because it is relevant for what comes next. He's the guy who opens doors, who knows the names of his coworkers' kids, and who cried at his dad's funeral in a way that surprised me because I'd never seen him cry before. He had grown up in a household where asking for help was a character defect, and he carried that into our marriage as some people carry an accent. He'd rather go with the time. Derek just stood there and didn't rescue her, which is quieter than letting someone see him asking for something. I thought that was strength. Derek's dad died one Tuesday in March. Sudden, no warning, heart attack. The kind of heart attack that leaves a family standing in a driveway not knowing what to do with their hands. His mother, Patricia, had never worked outside the house. His younger brother, Kyle, ran a landscaping business that had never quite taken off, and suddenly there was a mortgage payment with no name on it, and a business with no cushion behind it. 2 days after the funeral home, Derek came home and sat across the kitchen table from me. He didn't ask me for anything. Derek asks, "Not?" He just said quietly, looking at the table, not at me, that he didn't know how his mother was going to arrange the payment that month. That was the entire sentence. I saw him say it, and I saw the price he paid to say it. And I saw, in that instant, that he'd rather go unaided than beg for aid. So I didn't have him ask again. I had my money, separate from anything we shared, from my grandmother, who had left it to me the year before she died. The next week, I set up an automatic transfer. I transferred $2,500 to Patricia's account on the first of the month. I didn't tell Derek the exact amount. I never informed him that the arrangement was still active. He knew, in that vague way a man knows something he has decided not to look at too closely, that I was helping him. Never asked how much, or how long. I didn't let him ask. I told myself that was kindness. I paid for things quietly and told no one for 3 years. I missed a work conference I wanted to go to because the flight was more than I wanted to explain. I put off replacing a car that made a noise I didn't like. I didn't truly resent the sacrifices I made, not at all. It was just a weight I carried around without setting it down where Derek could see it. Walter, my father, was a machinist for 31 years until his knees and then his hip gave out on him. He's the guy who apologizes for asking you to pass the salt. 6 weeks ago, at a doctor's that I drove him to because my mother had a shift she couldn't miss for the first time in 3 years, I asked how Dad's recovery was going. She sounded genuinely concerned rather than just pretending to care. The doctor mentioned surgery, followed by Medicare, and then GAP. And I observed my father calculating the implications in his head, becoming quiet in a way that frightened me more than the diagnosis itself. Later in the car, he assured me that I need not be concerned. He would discover a solution, perhaps postponing the surgery for another year. He said it the same way Derek had said his own version of that sentence 3 years before, and I thought how strange it was that both men in my life would rather suffer in silence than ask a woman for money, but I didn't tell Derek how bad it was. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. No one sent the money due to feelings. The truth was, I was afraid of how Derek would react when I asked him for something, just as I had always kept him from feeling that fear with me. It was not just the surgery. It was every little thing over 3 years where Derek treated his family's needs as facts of nature and mine as inconveniences to be dealt with later. Derek, unprompted, raised the topic of Kyle's daughter's need for braces at dinner, already contemplating what we could send. When my mother said she needed a new water heater, he changed the subject to something about work. I don't think he recognized the pattern. I do not believe he ever monitored the frequency with which he mentioned Kyle's name that year, in comparison to the number of times he inquired about my father's hip. When the right time came, no one sent the money due to feelings. It was entirely wrong. It was Thursday, with dinner half over when Patricia rang. She was upset about a fundraiser at Kyle's daughter's school, specifically a charge that she believed the other parents should not have to be informed about and that she was unable to cover. Derek put her on speaker without asking me, as he always does, as if my presence at the table doesn't count as an audience. I sat there listening to her express her worries about $40, and I felt something inside me rise up. I said it with care. I said that my dad might need some help with the costs of the surgery. I hadn't worked out the gap yet, so I might have to have a talk with him about it soon. I wasn't trying to get a number. I wanted someone to listen to me, to be listened to. Derek didn't even stop talking to his mother to reply to me. He just waved his hand and, still looking at his phone on the table, said it wasn't really our problem. It was on my side to figure out. He said it loud enough for Patricia to hear it through the speaker. She laughed. She laughed, actually, a little surprised sound, as if the idea that my father's hip was anyone's business but mine were faintly comical to her, too. "You have your family for that, honey," she added, still half laughing, and went straight back to talking about the fundraiser like nothing had happened at all. There I sat with my fork in my hand, watching my husband nod in agreement with her, and I knew that in 3 years he had never once said my father's name to his mother the way he said Kyle's to me almost weekly. And then Derek continued to talk to his mother for 10 more minutes. He told her not to fret. They would think of something. He would look into it. I sat across from him and finished the rest of my dinner, saying nothing, because I already knew what I was going to do, and no way of saying it aloud would have hit harder than doing it in silence. I removed the plates. I told him I had some emails to catch up on from work. I went to my office and I opened the banking app and saw the recurring transfer, the one with just the name Patricia, of $2,500 on the first of every month, 36 times in the past. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I did not cry. I found and canceled the transfer that had gone out on the first of each month for 3 years. It asked me to confirm it. I verified. A tiny gray box popped up saying the recurring payment had been removed successfully. And that was that. Sound, none. Dramatic. No red screen. Just a quiet, administrative erasure of something I had carried alone for 3 years without ever being asked to. I sat at that table, or would you have gone silent for a long time afterwards? Not because I regretted it, but because I was trying to find a name for what I was feeling, and the closest word I could come up with wasn't anger. It was something closer to clarity. My father was sitting in a waiting room, doing math that he should not have been doing alone. I'd spent 3 years making Derek's discomfort vanish before he ever had to feel it. I had allowed Derek to believe that not asking made him strong, and I had allowed myself to believe that not telling made me kind. Neither of those things was true. They were just 2 people coming at the same conversation from different directions. I wondered what would happen at the end of the month when Patricia checks her account and the deposit she never knew she could count on isn't there. I thought of Kyle, his business more precarious than either of them liked to admit. and what a missed payment might do to what he'd planned to cover with it. I thought of Derek finding out, someday, what size I'd been carrying, and what his face would be like when he realized I'd never once made him ask. I felt no guilt about any of it. That surprised me more than anything else that night. I'd been the one who smoothed things over for 3 years before anyone had to feel the rough edge, and for the first time I let the edge be precisely where it was. Derek never asked what it was for, but I knew what that money really meant to them. It covered the difference between what Kyle's landscaping business made in the slow months and what his mortgage cost. It saved Patricia from having to sell the house her father-in-law had added to with his hands. I'd never resented any of it. What I resented was sitting there in the dark. I resented sitting there in the dark, feeling as if my father's dignity mattered less than theirs, as if my father's dignity were less important than theirs. I was quietly protecting the dignity of this very family for 3 years running. An hour later, Derek approached me, expressing his exhaustion and inviting me to join him in bed. He asked if I thought we would not fully recover, and then thought we would not fully recover and invited me to join him in bed. Told him I'd be up in a minute. He didn't ask why I was still in the office, light on, staring at nothing in particular. He never actually questioned me like that. It hadn't mattered before. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I saw it clearly. I saw it clearly for the first time in 3 years and asked how Dad's recovery was going. She sounded genuinely concerned rather than just pretending to care. The way I see it, a column doesn't add up, and I let myself sit with what it meant instead of explaining it away. I shut the laptop. I switched off the light, and for the first time in 3 years, I went to bed without a number in my head that belonged to someone else's family. I didn't know yet how fast that silence would spread, or how loud it would get when it reached the people whose lives were built on a deposit they never had to ask me for. All I knew was that somewhere between the fork I'd put down quietly and the light switch I'd turned off, I'd ceased to be the person who made everyone else's problems disappear silently. And I wasn't in any rush to go back to being her Dot. It was the third 4 days since the transfer was supposed to go through. Patricia called. Derek texted me at work, just a screenshot of her message, no words of his own, as I sat at my desk. She wanted to know if something was wrong with their account, as she hadn't seen a deposit she was counting on. I didn't text back right away. I sat at my desk, staring at the screenshot, and I felt something I didn't think I would. Calm. Not satisfaction, per se, just the occasional persistent silence of watching something I made on my own finally sounds loud enough. The occasional persistent silence of watching something I created finally makes a sound loud enough for someone else to hear. By someone else. Derek called her back during his lunch break, and I know the details because he casually mentioned it to me that night, as if it were a minor issue like a bank error or a glitch that would resolve itself in a day or two. I know this sounds stressed, and I asked her to check with her bank. These things happen sometimes, he said. He said this while standing at the kitchen counter, pouring himself a glass of water, not even looking at me. I didn't say anything. I left the glitch in. 2 days later, Kyle called him up. I wasn't in the room, but I heard Derek's half of it through the doorway, heard the tightness in his voice I'd heard at the funeral, in the driveway, and in every moment over 3 years when his family's troubles had become his troubles as well. Vendor payment did not work. Kyle needed the cash by Friday, or he would lose a contract that constituted a third of his spring business. Derek told him he would figure it out. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time, and then he came to find me. I watched him through the door before he saw me, watched him rub his hands over his face the way he does before a conversation he's been avoiding. He asked me if I knew anything about a payment that was not going through to his mother. I told him I had canceled it, which was true. He said, "Why?" And for a second I almost softened it, almost looked for some kinder version of the answer that would let him feel less blindsided. No, I did not. I told him that I had been sending his mother $2,500 a month for 3 years, out of my account, and he had never asked me how much. And I had stopped the night he had told Patricia, in front of me, that my father's operation was not our problem. For a long time, he said nothing. I saw something cross his face I'd not seen before. Not anger, exactly. More like the floor sliding away beneath what he'd thought was solid ground. "How much?" he asked. I said the number, out loud, to him for the first time in 3 years. $90,000. His legs told him to sit down at the table, and he did. He wanted to know why I never told him. I asked him why he never asked me. The question froze him. He was going to say something about how he would have helped, how he would have wanted to know. And I asked him gently if he remembered the conversation at the kitchen table 3 years ago, the one where he told me in that same quiet voice that he didn't know how his mother was going to make her payment. He remembered that. I asked him if he had ever asked me in the past 3 years how the payments were covered. He didn't reply to that one. I explained to him that the real issue was that we had never been a genuine partnership. "I just kind of assumed we were doing it," he said. And it was me, alone, every first of the month, while he got to believe in some version of events where nobody had to be uncomfortable. He didn't argue. He just sat there, slowly turning his water glass around on the table, like he does when he's thinking something through he doesn't like. I told him I hadn't hidden it to hurt him. I'd hidden it because he'd made it clear, without ever saying so directly, that he needed to believe that the problems of his family were being taken care of by some force he didn't have to look at too closely. I'd been that force. I told him that when my father had needed that kind of help, he hadn't offered the same grace, not even in private, not even for a second. And the difference between those two reactions was the entire reason I was sitting across from him now, telling him a number he'd never known. He didn't stand up for what he said at the dinner, I'll give him that. He sat and allowed the situation to continue, as people often do at that table. Would you have remained silent if there were no version of the truth left to discuss? He then asked me what I wanted to do next. I told him I didn't know yet, but I wasn't going to be the only one in this marriage quietly taking the brunt of both families' worst moments, while the other one got to walk away clean. 2 days later, Patricia came to our place unannounced, the way she does when she's decided something needs handling in person. Derek opened the door before I could say anything, and she stood in our kitchen looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, saying she didn't understand that Derek had told her it was a bank error, and that she had no idea where the money had even been coming from all this time. It was, she thought, she said, from Derek, from some account of his, some inheritance from his father she hadn't asked too many questions about. I also told her the truth. I told her it had been coming from me, from my money, for 3 years, every month, and that I'd stopped it the night I heard her laugh about my father's hip like it was nothing whatsoever. Something complicated happened to her face. She began to apologize in a way that felt more like an explanation, saying she didn't know and that she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I let her continue. Then I told her that not knowing was really beside the point. The point was, when it was her family's turn to need something for the first time in 3 years, and they asked how Dad's recovery was going, she sounded genuinely concerned rather than just pretending to care. The whole table treated it like an emergency, but when it was my turn, they laughed it off in the same breath. Then she was quiet a minute, standing there in her coat like she didn't know if it was all right to sit down. Then she asked, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard her use, if I regretted any of it. The 3 years, the silence, all of it. I said no. I told her I wished I had said something sooner, but not for help. Even while sitting across from the woman who had laughed at my father, I still meant what I said. Some kindnesses are worth bestowing, even upon people who do not yet know how to receive them properly. Most of it, Derek just stood there and didn't rescue her. And that surprised me more than anything else that week. She left. He sat back down across from me and quietly said that he was ashamed. He said that too, not sorry, exactly. Awkward. He said he hadn't known how easy it was to put something on me that he would have called impossible to bear if anyone had ever asked it of him directly. We didn't achieve it all right that night. I want to be honest about that because it would not be true to say that one conversation undid 3 years of an arrangement built on silence. But something was different. For the first time, Derek asked me what my father really needed, the real number, and the actual gap in coverage. I said to him. He didn't flinch the way I'd feared he would once. He asked if we could look at it together, like you'd look at any other bill in a marriage, out loud, at the same table, both names on it. The next weekend, he drove to see my father alone, which he had never done before without me arranging it first. I don't know what they were talking about. Later, my father told me, a little sheepishly, that Derek had simply asked him how much the surgery would cost him out of pocket, and told him they would cover part of it together, no separate account, and no quiet transfer that would never be spoken of again. When he told me that, my father cried a little. He's not a man for tears, either. Derek also, almost as an afterthought, asked about his hip itself, how it actually felt, not just what it cost, saying that no one on that side of the family had ever bothered to ask before, my father said. That week, Kyle dealt with the bounced payment himself, scrambling up a short-term loan from a long-time supplier. He called Derek after that, not for anything, just to tell him it was taken care of, and Derek told me later there'd been something in Kyle's voice that sounded almost relieved, like being forced to take care of it himself hadn't been the disaster he'd been expecting. Patricia and I are still not quite up on our feet. I don't think we will, not totally. Not for a long time. But she called me out of the blue last month, the first time in 3 years, and asked how Dad's recovery was going, and she sounded like she gave a shit, not like she was just putting on concern for Derek's benefit. It's a small thing. I saw it anyway. I have lived long enough to see the small things and know that usually they are where real change begins. A few weeks ago, I sat with my father in the recovery room, months after that night in my office with the cursor hovering over the cancel button. He was coming up slowly from the anesthetic, groggy, and he squeezed my hand and asked if everything had been covered, still worried about it, even half asleep. I said it was so. I didn't share the entire story about how it was covered, especially not that day. I just held his hand and watched the machines beep steadily next to him, and I thought about how quiet that room was, how no one in it owed anyone a debt they had to keep secret. A little while later, Derek came in with coffee for both of us and sat down on the other side of the bed without being asked. And for the first time in a long time, nobody at that bedside was carrying anything alone. This time, no one sent the money out of guilt. When it finally moved, it moved because someone had actually asked, out loud, at a shared table, with our names on the account. I think about that difference more than the actual number. I mistook silence for love for 3 years. I don't anymore. Real love asks the hard question before it has to. It doesn't wait for somebody to quietly call off a transfer in the dark before it sees what it's been costing them all along. What would you have done if you had been in my place that night? Would you have spoken at that table, stayed silent like it, or gone quiet as I did, allowing the transfer to speak for itself? And Patricia, did you judge her as I did, or did you understand her a little more than I wanted to? Please let me know in the comments. And if stories like these get under your skin the way they get under mine, subscribe to The Long Memory. There is always another one worth telling.